We all hear a lot about digital transformation, but unless you've been there and done it, it's easy to feel that transformation is a significant challenge that might seem difficult to conquer. That is why we've launched the Good, Bad and Ugly podcast series. Each episode, we talk to people who've been at the heart of transformation, and we get under the skin, not just of what they did and how they did it, but how it felt to be at the center of it. Welcome to our podcast, Being a Digital Leader, the good, the bad, and the ugly of digital transformation. I'm Wendy Stonefield. I'm the London Hub Executive, and I'll be your host today. Our guest today is former founder and CEO of Web Credible, turned author, I have the evidence right here, and the driving force behind the leadership coaching business, Team Stärker, joining us to share insights into his fascinating journey. I can't wait to hear more. And the dynamics of transforming client-facing businesses with a focus on people skills is none other than Trenton Moss. Trenton, is fantastic to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hey,
and I've given you a brief highlighted intro, but I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit more about yourself as by way of an introduction.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Trenton, obviously. And I spent most of my career running a user experience agency. So I started the business Web Credible around 20 years ago. And there was a real gap in the market for user experience. No one was really talking about it. No one was really talking about, well, let's understand the needs and goals of our users and then design products and services that solve problems. Like, it seems weird that no one was saying that. So I started an agency doing that, and I was, luckily it worked, and I was able to grow that agency. It was a bit of a roller coaster ride over 15 years, but it was quite a lot of fun. And I think there were a couple of real seminal moments for me doing that. One of them was launching a behavior transformation program internally. So we started this program within the business around trying to equip our teams with the ability to have difficult conversations with clients, to really inspire and influence those clients, to kind of influence and persuade clients where need be, to adapt how they communicate in a way that works for clients. And it was really successful, actually. It worked really well. We saw a real impact in the business. So I saw firsthand the power of kind of transforming people's behavior and I guess supercharging them with emotional intelligence and people skills. And that was a real interesting moment for me, because it was then that I realized that emotional intelligence and people skills really can be taught. And it is just like any skill where it comes naturally to some people more than others. However, with any skill, you can also learn it and you can improve and get better. So that was my first kind of real seminal moment within the business. And the second kind of thing that was really interesting was I used to run some communities, a community for design leaders and a community for digital leaders within brands, all running large teams. And we'd meet every month and we'd talk about their pain points. And it was always people issues. Right? No one's going into these conversations saying, "Oh, well, the tech wasn't built properly." It's just always people issues, that my team can't seem to work well with other teams, or I've got these issues within the team, or we can't influence stakeholders in the way we need to be. Always people issues. And I remember thinking, well, you can teach people these skills and you can learn them. And it seemed like everyone's got this problem. So I ran my agency for 15 years. We were acquired in the end. And I left shortly afterwards, and I realized I need to start a company solving this problem, because everyone seems to have these issues with people not having the skills to work well with each other and not having as much emotional intelligence as ideally they should have.
That's great, thank you. And it's interesting to hear your reflections of transforming your own agency, Web Credible, and the transferability of that work that you did internally into other teams, client side, and probably in other customer and client-facing organizations as well. And that's quite a journey. It's quite a lot of change, I would imagine, from running your own agency we'll talk about, touched on it briefly when you handed me my beautiful copy of Human Powered, the experience of writing a book, but now actually running a business that is about supporting others in developing high performing teams with great emotional intelligence and people skills. Can you just tell us a little bit more for you personally what that journey has been like, and some of the differences in the change that you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, it's been. I'm really enjoying it. I feel like it's my mission, because if everyone in the world had reasonable levels of skill in emotional intelligence, if this stuff was taught in school, if we sat there and we taught our kids how to have really strong skills in empathy, how to build up your self-awareness, and then those kids then, came out of schools and universities and into the workplace. I mean, just imagine what the working world would be like. No stakeholder politics, no petty disputes, no grievances. Would be able to work together properly as people, and that's going to impact business performance, obviously, and it's been proven time and time again that a team that works well together outperforms a team that doesn't. The Glassdoor best places to work always outperform the rest of the stock market. So this stuff is, for me, super important. And so obviously I started Team Sturka around 3 or so years ago, just around the time COVID hit, which was an interesting time to start a business, and had to flip the whole way I envisaged it worked. And I wrote the book at the same time about the skills that I believe everyone needs. I'm a qualified and certified executive coach. I've been a Samaritan in the past, done a lot of work around coaching and counselling. So I've got kind of, I guess, the background in all of this, and I've seen it applied within my agency, with clients, and internally within brands. So taking all of that knowledge, interviewing a lot of digital leaders as well. Back in 2020, I wrote the book, and then, it came out in 21, which was very exciting. And a couple of weeks later, it became a bestseller in its category, which was even more exciting, probably mostly for my mother, actually. She was extremely excited.
I'm sure, super proud mum.
Yeah, super proud mum, which was nice.
No, that's really interesting. And it's really interesting that you talk about, look, emotional intelligence has become one of those buzzwords in business as well. And there is, nobody would have been speaking about that 10 years ago. And you allude to the fact that, there are some people who may be more traditional who feel that there's a fluffiness to it. And, I think you and I, when we touched base previously, I've said, we're all human beings. We spend a lot of time at work, more time at work than we spend with our families, friends, and loved ones. And on a purely human level, who doesn't want to make that the best possible experience? And I think people genuinely don't come to work to not get along and be high performing. So where does it go wrong? Emotional intelligence, I think it's a really interesting conversation about the nature versus nurture discussion, because I think it does seem like there are people who are just more, it comes more naturally than it does to other people. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Look, as I said, emotional intelligence is like any skill. So there are, like, my son would love to be a football player when he grows up. Like, he just dreams of being a footballer, but he doesn't have the natural talent, I'm afraid. And I think he's starting.
Dad.
He's starting to realize. I've never said that to him, but I think he's starting to realize it. That he's putting the effort in, and he's pretty good at football, but he's never going to make it as a Premier League player or even anything remotely close. So emotional intelligence is like a skill, like football, like any skill, and it comes more naturally to some people who just naturally then realize they're quite good at it, perhaps have an interest in it, and then develop themselves further. And some people it comes less naturally to. There's also a case of, I think, waiting for the kind of older school behavior, the people exhibiting that behavior, to perhaps retire and leave the workplace. And I think there's probably another 10, 15 years of that, because you've got plenty of execs in place who grew up in a very different working environment, and who were taught that, being fluffy and showing emotions and showing any kind of weakness is wrong. That is not what you do. And I remember chatting to an exec about a year ago now, guy, probably late 50s, super successful career, working very senior for large multinational businesses. And he was very honest with me, and he said, Trenton, I struggle a bit with this, because he said, I get it. I get why I should behave this way. I get the benefits, because so much has been written about the benefits of working in psychological safety in an organization that can allow people to thrive. So he's like, I completely understand it, but I got brought up in the working world getting taught something very different. And I spent my early years in the working world, the first 5-10 years, perfecting basically being an arsehole, because that's what he was told to do. And that's what he was told would help him be successful. And it did help him be successful. So he learnt that behavior from the infancy of his career and then just built on that. And he was very honest, and he said, I know I need to change, and I try my best to empower other people and, to lift them up and to use principles of, positive psychology. And he said, sometimes I do succeed and I get there, but other times I don't, because I've got this learnt behavior that is so difficult for me to change.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I think there's probably, not to put a gender lens over everything, there is probably part of a gender discussion around it where a lot of women have always felt they have to suppress that emotional, intelligent aspect of their being in order to be successful as well. So in some ways quite liberating for those people who've had to quieten down that aspect of their leadership style.
Yeah, I think that's everyone. I think that's not. I think it's across all genders.
No,
it's all of us have certain ways of being. We all, there are different behavior types, and there are certain behavior types that are more motivated by building up personal relationships, and it's those people in particular, I would say, who had to suppress that, which is completely wrong, because we want everyone to flourish. If we want to be the highest possible performing organization, we need our individuals to be at the highest possible performing levels.
Yeah, I'm keen to dig into that a little bit, because you reference the fact that there's a lot of research around why it's important and the business benefits. Can we talk a little bit more
sure.
Around that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was an interesting study a joint study by Harvard and Stanford universities, and they found that 85% of job success comes from well-developed people skills. Yeah. Like 85%.
Immense.
And so some research that I did as part of the book found that for UK executives, 70% of the problems they deal with, they would describe as people issues. So 70% of the time that they have to spend solving issues is due to people. And all of that interferes in your ability to kind of crack on and do a really good job and work on strategy and important things. So there's a clear business case here, I think. Google, there was a really great study by Google. I mean, it's pretty old now, it's probably about 10 years old, but they spent 2 years going around the organization looking at all the teams and working out which were the most high-performing teams and the lowest-performing teams, and just studying, trying to work out what do those high-performing teams have in common. And they thought they were going to look for, certain job roles or certain levels of seniority and so on and so on. And what they found that they couldn't believe, because the thing they found that all those teams had in common? Psychological safety. It's just remarkable.
So proven and well evidenced. Yeah. And I think, it sounds, when you talk about it like that, it sounds so obvious. And we talk about the fact that everybody has good intent.
They do.
And yet you have formed Team Sturk on the basis of the fact that actually not everybody's there. And these are real challenges that many organizations still grapple with. So my question is, what are we still not getting right in terms of the people skills? Where are we going wrong? What are we missing?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like with any skill that you want to develop. It's about it's looking at the learning situation. I mean, look, there are so many skills that we need to learn, right? So emotional intelligence is one of them. But to be successful in a role, you've got lots of different things that you need to learn and ways to be. For me, given that 85% of job success comes from people skills, I think that should be a priority. And like you said before, some executives might see it as something that's a bit fluffy. But there's some really basic things. So like there's 4 key motivators that we as humans have, and that can be relationships, as I mentioned before, can be a big driver for people and where you get your energy from having those connections with people. Another one of the key drivers is recognition. So perhaps people who do podcasts and post a lot on social media, the recognition is what gives them energy. Another one is achievement. Mm-hmm. So getting stuff done and like feeling like, you're making progression. And the final one is kind of crafting and perfecting items. So it's those four things that as humans, we generally get our energy from, and everyone is different. Mm-hmm. Right, so there's some people, take my wife, for example. My wife, I know which profile she is. She very much gets her energy from personal relationships. So when she goes into a meeting at work, if the people in that meeting just want to crack on with it and not spend just a couple of minutes having a bit of chat, connecting, that's hard for her. That will drain her energy. Mm. And there's, a quarter of people have that as their primary energy driver. So you've got to take time to build a human connection with someone like my wife. Whereas someone like me, I'm one quite opposite to that. I'm driven by achievement. So I'm very happy to go into a meeting and not even have the other person say, "How are you?" I have no interest in someone saying to me, "How are you?" "Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?" "Yeah, I'm fine." Okay, well, that wasted 10 seconds. Let's crack on and try and achieve stuff. Because I very much get my energy from achieving. Yeah. And it's not that I don't care about people. I deeply care about people. I get my energy from trying to achieve things, though. So I need to be aware. I need to know how to spot who gets their energy from relationships, who from recognition, who from achievement like me, and who from crafting things. And I need to change my conversation style, not my personality, but I just need to change how I communicate to those people based on those styles.
And I was going to say, my interaction with you was very much, and you'd probably read me and adapted your style, asking questions that were more around relationship build in terms of background, where I lived, etc. So really interesting that you've honed that in yourself.
Well, you kind of, if you want people to like you, if you want to, it's not like it's not a sneaky thing, right? It just kind of, after a while, it just comes naturally. But it's just, if you're able to read what someone's motivations are, then, like with any skill, you start with, what is it? It's I don't know, this is a really tricky one to state. You start with unconscious incompetence and you move to unconscious competence. So you've got unconscious incompetence, which is basically where you know nothing about it, you don't know what you don't know, and you're useless at it. Yeah. So let's just say it in the context of understanding someone's personality type and their motivators. So let's just say you're rubbish at that. You don't even know about it. You don't even know it exists. So I run training programs in this, and there's plenty of people who don't even know this stuff exists, which for me is, I find crazy, but anyway. But then you learn about it, right? And just because you learn about something, it doesn't make you good at it. Yeah. So now you've got conscious incompetence because you're aware of it, but you're rubbish at it because you haven't flexed that muscle. So then you maybe learn about, okay, I need to adapt how I communicate to different people. So you start practicing. And over time, like with anything, practice makes perfect. Well, not quite perfect, but practice helps you get better. And then you get to conscious competence. So then you're in a position where it's like, okay, I get these different personality types. I get how people like to communicate. I get that people have different motivations, and I can kind of work out what those are for different people. Okay, I'm working at this and I'm getting quite good at it. And then eventually you get to the best part, which is unconscious competence, where it just becomes a natural part of how you are. And again, all of our issues in the world, really, pretty much all of them, political, social, and, even within business, everything, it's all just communications. And if we just went into those, adapting how we communicate, trying to come up with win-win outcomes, assuming the best of intentions of people, because no one's got bad intentions, then the world, the working world, schools, everything would be so much better.
When I woke up this morning, I didn't think we were going to be solving world problems, but I do. I love it, Trenton. I find that really interesting because you talk about, you allude to the different sort of frameworks and tools that are out there in terms of identifying what somebody's natural personal traits are. And we, from an AND perspective, we use HBDI as our internal tool. But I agree with you. I think it's about how you bed that down and use it. Because it's one thing having awareness and having training in it and knowing what your profile is. It's another thing, how do you incorporate that into your way of operating? And I think, as you're saying, it's not a sneaky thing, because you're doing it to help achieve your own objectives, but also do so in a way that is collaborative and conducive to how those other people, to other colleagues and peers around you, how they operate and gain an understanding of that.
100%.
So really interested in that. And I suppose in terms of the work that you do at Team Sturka, and interested in the name, and happy for you to talk to us about sort of why Team Sturka and the meaning behind it. But also interested in terms of how you typically, what challenges are presented to you? Like, what's the symptom that comes to you when a client picks up the phone to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, the name comes from the Icelandic word for strong. So Sturka is strong in Icelandic. And when I founded the company, I was watching a lot of Vikings on Amazon, and Icelandic people are actually descendants from the Vikings. And I was reading about Vikings at the time. I was quite interested, and it turns out that the reason the Vikings were so successful was they broke themselves down into small, self-managed and very high-performing teams. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. So most armies would just like attack en masse, and there'd be some big, Braveheart style battle, and whoever had the most numbers would win. Whereas the Vikings used to like attack us Brits and so on, in what appeared to be a very haphazard attack to us, but actually was very well coordinated, and the teams were very high performing. So I thought, okay, they were strong teams. So I took the Icelandic word for strong and made it Team Sturka.
I love that, taking inspiration from battle to create peace and harmony.
Yeah, from like 1,500 years ago.
Exactly, really interesting. And I mean, so then in terms of, typically what problems are presented to you when somebody comes to you for support? What are the pain points?
Yeah, it's always people problems. So it's like, my team struggles to have difficult conversations, be it with clients or be it with stakeholders if you're working internally. I've got these potentially issues within my team not being able to work well together. And then obviously we work generally in matrix structures now in organizations. So the days of kind of silos of, say, within digital, you've got your designers, you've got your engineers, you've got your product managers, and they used to sit in their 3 different silos, and the directors would venture out of those silos and communicate with each other. Whereas nowadays, obviously, we're working in cross-functional teams, we're interfacing directly with stakeholders, and people just don't have the skills to be able to get the outcomes that they want. And ideally, what we should all be going for is win-win outcomes. So you go into a meeting with a stakeholder or with a client, and they maybe railroad you, or they suggest this, or they want that, and none of those are going to help you achieve your objective. You think they're all terrible ideas. So you do one of 2 things. You either kind of like say, okay, and you kind of bend, bend to their will, and you do something that's a win for them but a lose for you, which isn't ideal. You don't want win-lose. Or you might try and argue with them and try and push your way through, which is going to get their back up because they feel like you don't get them. And actually, you're far better off going in trying to seek a win-win. So in every conversation you have with a client, with a stakeholder, with a boss, with someone in your team, all of those conversations, before you go into it, just think to yourself, what do I want to get out of this? What's the outcome that I want? What does success look like for me? And for really important conversations, you might want to discuss that with a teammate and write it down even. But for often you can just think about it. And then once you work that out, what success looks like for you, you then say, well, what do they want out of this? What does success look like for that person I'm meeting with? And again, you might want to seek advice from a colleague or 2 to try and work that out. And then you go into that meeting and you can say, right, we're meeting about this, just so you know, I want you to know this is what success looks like for me. This is the outcome I want to get to. Now, I think maybe you want to get to an outcome that's maybe X. Does that sound about right? And they'll say yes, or they'll say no, and they'll talk something else. You say, great, okay, what I need is this. What you need is this. Just so you know, in this meeting, I'm going to take a 50-50 stand for both of those outcomes. Like for me, it's not okay for me to leave this meeting without getting the outcome that I need. And it's equally not okay for me to leave this meeting without you getting the outcome you need. And if you say that to a stakeholder, a colleague, or whoever it is you're with, I mean, how empowering is that for them? Like, wow, okay, I can't railroad them because they're not going to accept that. And at the same time, they're going to be supporting me hitting my goals. And the conversation that you have just changes. it just transforms when you make them aware that you want that win-win outcome.
Yeah, great. I mean, it sounds super simple, but in terms of that change in behaviors, I'd imagine that takes a lot of, to your point, practice and developing the muscle memory. But in doing that, you also described how almost painted a picture of nirvana. We're working as cross-functional teams and the old days of silos. And I think, in some cases that is true. I think in other cases, not yet. But in terms of that cross-functional scenario, you are often bringing together people who do approach things from very different,
very much so.
Personality types, and bringing very different ways of thinking and working together. So I'm interested in sort of your take on that and your thinking around that. And I'm also interested in how you think us working post-COVID in a world where there is actually, although we're all more back in the office now than we have been for a long time, for purposes of collaboration, but we are not collaborating as much in person. Like, what impact do you think that has had as well?
Okay. So in terms of cross-functional teams working well together, different personality types, different drivers, I mean, you see it all the time. And look, to be honest, it kind of ties back to just the things that I'm saying. So it's about being aware of you, your drivers, your motivations, how you like to communicate, how you like to behave, and understanding that. And it's very easy to learn more about yourself because you just ask people. So as a first step that I often encourage people to do, talk to 3 colleagues who you trust, who you feel will be honest with you, who you feel kind of safety with, and say, what is it that I do to have a negative impact on you or other people? And you let them speak, and you don't get defensive. You just listen to what they're saying. You ask them to expand. You ask questions, and you learn, the things that you do to have a negative impact on people. And then you say, well, what is it that you value in me, and what is it that I do to have a positive impact on you and others? And you hear a bunch of stuff, and that's the starting point. And then you say, okay, well, these are certain behaviours that people value in me, and these are ones that don't work so well. These are perhaps things I need to work on. And you talk to people about this. And one thing that I also teaches the principle of see it, say it, stop it, which I think's lovely. And it sounds just like if you live in London, on the underground where there's a dodgy package. See it, say it, sorted. So it's a little bit similar to that, the phrase. But it's essentially, if you've got a behaviour that has a negative impact on other people, obviously you don't want to keep doing it. No, we all have the best of intentions. So if you have conversations and realise this, you will start to notice it. You will see it. You will be in conversations and you will see yourself, say, railroading someone because you want to push your opinion through because you're time poor, you've got loads of things to think about, you just want it to happen. So you will start noticing it. You will naturally start seeing it. And then the next thing you do is you say it. So you're in the meeting, and a lot of people are very nervous to do this. You're in the meeting and you say, hold on. You know what? I'm railroading you here. I'm actually steamrolling my idea over the top here and trying to push it through, and that's not a good thing to do because you're not going to buy into it, and therefore no one's going to really be motivated to make this happen. I'm really sorry. I'm trying to stop doing that. Let's reset and start again. And what's quite extraordinary is if you say something like that, you naturally move to the next stage, which is stop it. You will not do it again in that interaction. It just, as soon as you acknowledge it. And people find that quite difficult because they're going to think I'm weak for saying this. And me pointing this out, maybe they don't realize it. And it's like, they do realize it. They're sitting in the meeting knowing they're getting railroaded by you and knowing that you railroad them every single time. So by acknowledging it, the levels of respect that people then get for you just soar, and they're far more likely to help you achieve your goals.
Yeah.
So, in all of these interactions, you need to learn about yourself. You need to have a real understanding of self-awareness. I think self-awareness is one of the most important skills because everything follows from that. So you learn about yourself, you then learn about other people and try and work out where they're coming from. Always, always, always assume the best of intentions. No matter how rude someone is, no matter how badly they behave, no matter how they communicate, that their intention is not to upset, frustrate, or annoy you. Their intention is something else, and they just happen to have upset, frustrated, and annoyed you. So don't judge them on their behaviors or their communications. judge them on their intentions and try and be the better person. And if you can get those two things working, know about yourself, assume the best of intentions in other people, always seek a win-win outcome, then working in cross-functional teams in principle is a breeze.
Gosh, make it sound easy.
Well, it kind of is once you've got these skills, but then, the pressures of everyday life come into it, right? And, you've got the pressures of home life and whatever you've got going on in there, and you've got the pressures of work where we're all trying to do too much and haven't got enough time. So, and it can be frustrating. So I work with people sometimes who I find incredibly frustrating, and I find it really hard to work with them because of my personality type. And I get where they're coming from, and I get that they're not trying to annoy me, and they do still annoy me because I'm human.
Yeah.
Right? And we all have different ways of communicating and being. So I'm hopefully, able to move on from my frustration and see them for the intentions that the good intentions they have. But yeah, I still need to vent and get frustrated at people so I can move on to that stage of assuming the best of intentions.
Yeah, and I think it's all aimed at getting the best possible output. But it's really interesting because you talk about it's very disarming, the positioning around acknowledging I'm pushing and I'm railroading is quite disarming, I would imagine. And actually what that would do in a meeting dynamic would then, open up a whole different conversation.
It changes. It's unbelievable, the difference. And I know this firsthand because when I run workshops around this principle of see it, say it, stop it, and then I get people to share examples of when they might have seen that happen. So when they just might have been in a meeting where someone said, hold on, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have behaved this way. So I've heard, 100 or more examples of this from people in my workshops. And every time they say the same thing, what you just said, that it shifts the dynamic. And everyone's like, whoa. And your respect levels for that person just soar.
Yeah. Well, it is about everybody then being able to contribute, be creative, be vulnerable in that scenario so that you do have the right outcome.
Yeah, well, it's that psychological
decision
safety.
Or whatever it is you're discussing, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Totally. And, in the spirit of, we're called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly as a workshop, as a podcast session, without naming any names. But of course, you can if you want to. But can you share the good, the bad and the ugly of senior teams that you have interfaced in? What have been the real kind of hard nuts to crack? Or, does everybody ultimately get there, or just at a different pace?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, there's no one I've worked with who I would describe as either good, bad, or ugly. Everyone has elements of all of them, right? So, some of the things I've been talking about today is it's like a nirvana. Like for any skill that you want to develop, no one's ever going to be perfect at it. We haven't got the time to do it or the budgets to do it. So there's no senior team I've ever worked with where they've been good in everything, bad in everything, or ugly in everything. There are ugly things that I see, and certainly if you're running digital, you're running product, you're running digital transformation, the biggest challenge you have is, and this is, I guess, is kind of ugly, but for you, and this is across so many organizations, your goals and your objectives will often clash with other people in the senior team. So if you're running transformation, your objectives generally are quite based on long-term change. They're right on making this organization fit for the modern world and looking at the org structure, the ways of working, culture, and so on, and moving things into the modern era. And that often conflicts with the often slightly more short-termer objectives that other people on the exec team have. And I remember hearing one example from a very quite senior digital product person, and they're trying to get budget, and they're sitting there, the exec team's all around the table, and the CIO says, well, I need 50 million quid to invest in this system. And at the moment, it's being held together by a bunch of band-aids. And if you don't give me 50 million quid, this system will probably break in the next year and our whole business will cease to function. Mm-hmm. How can you argue with that? Mm-hmm. How can you compete with that? How can you say, well, I want to digitally transform the business. I need money. It's just difficult. And then, your CMO sits there and says, well, obviously we need to market the business, and we normally spend X on advertising. I need that money to keep going. Marketing budgets tend to be quite large, and we kind of keep them at that scale, and it's really hard to compete. And when you're running digital and product in a business, I've seen many businesses where that digital senior person lasts for just a few years, not very long, because you're just banging your head against a brick wall every single day, and it's exhausting. So you stay for 2 or 3 years, you try and bring about some change, and you go, and the next person comes in to bang their head. And that's the hardest thing around running transformation, is that everyone else is thinking shorter term, and their objectives don't necessarily align with yours.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've got plenty of senior digital people who can come in and tell you about their banging heads against walls.
But I think it's a really interesting, it cuts through to what do you define as transformation, and how extensive is that, and what can be realistically achieved within any given time frame, and ultimately bringing those stakeholders together who all should have a combined and mutual objective that they're trying to hit, and how do you create the win-win between those different
and it's really hard. Like, look, in a smaller business, it's actually really easy because you have an overarching objective for your business, and then you just let that obviously transcend down to people's individual objectives on an exec level, and then through to the people in the rest of the business. It's easy in a small business. In a massive juggernaut of a multi-million, multi-billion pound business, it's incredibly challenging. So we can sit here and say, wow, that's such an awkward way of being, but solving that problem is hard.
It's really difficult, and I think taking inspiration from how different cultures, if you look at Japanese corporations and how they manage that flow in very large scale, global enterprise is quite interesting as well, with structures around corporate objectives that flow down into country department, and then down to individual as well, but in quite a formal, structured, rigorous way.
Which is how it should be.
Really, really interesting. And the book, we'll hold the book up, Human Powered, explores how to supercharge yourself with people skills and emotional intelligence. And I hope everybody will rush out and download Audible or order their hard copy. But can you give us, I'm all up for practical tools that will help people supercharge themselves. So are there 1 or 2 practical tools you can give us that people could take away from listening?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about already. So it's about learning about yourself, and the way you do this is you just ask people about the impact that you have on them and the impact they see you having on other people, and you do this with an open mind. I mean, you have to give that other person psychological safety when answering it, because the moment you get defensive about it, then they shut down and they'll stop giving you honest feedback. So get honest feedback from people about the positive and negative impact that you have on others. And with everyone you interact with, assume the best of intentions. So stop judging people by their behavior and communications that you don't like, and assume the best of intentions. And those, for me, are the 2 kind of core things. There's a really interesting tribe in Southern Africa that I know about called the Babemba tribe. And they do something really interesting in there, which I love. So if someone in the Babemba tribe commits a crime or some sort of misdemeanor, then what they do in the tribe is they get that person to stand somewhere, and they all form a massive circle around them, and they don't shout at that person or beat them or anything like that. Instead, what they do is everyone in the tribe takes a turn to talk about that person's positive contribution to the tribe and the things that they value in them, and you have to go into a lot of detail. So this takes ages because the whole tribe has to speak, and after a few hours they have a big celebration, and that person's symbolically welcomed back. So they're not giving that person attention about the negative things that he or she did. Instead, they're talking to that person about the great things they do and trying to get that person to focus on doing those great things more and bringing them up and lifting them up. And that's what we should be doing. Not just in the workplace, but with our families, in everything that we do. We've got to stop making people wrong. We got to start seeking win-win outcomes and making it clear that we're on your team. Another great example. I love this example because this also applies to with kids. So one thing I've learnt is that with young kids, like a toddler, like a 2 or 3 year old, if you give that child a banana and the kid, and you peel the banana and you hand the banana to the child, one thing I've learned that globally this applies, because I've talked about this with people all over the world, if that banana breaks, right, you peeled it and the top of the banana breaks off, that child will lose it, regardless of what country they live in.
I think I remember
and what
that.
culture. That child loses it. And and the child goes, I don't want this banana, it's broken, get me a new banana, I'm not eating this. And you know what we do as parents all the time? We make our child wrong for feeling that way. And we say, don't be ridiculous. I'm not getting you a new banana. There's nothing wrong with this banana. Now, not for a second saying you should get them another banana. What I am saying is you shouldn't make them wrong for being upset about the banana breaking in half. So, often we're saying, oh, you can't get another banana. No, there's nothing wrong with it. Just stop crying. You don't need to feel this way. And actually what you should do with your kid is you get down on their level and you say, I'm so sorry your banana's split in half. You really wanted your bananas to be in one piece and now it's in two, and you're obviously really upset about this. Yeah, I want a new banana, get me another banana. You say, oh my gosh, you're so distraught about this. I'm so sorry. I know that you wanted it in one piece and it's in two, and this is just awful for you. And what you're doing is you're showing them so much empathy, but you're not for a second making them wrong. And then eventually you can move the conversation on to explain why you're not going to get another banana. But you're looking for a win-win outcome here, because they don't, they're upset because the banana's broken. They want a banana that tastes nice, and they think a banana broken maybe isn't. And you're saying, I can't get you one because it's a waste. We can't always do that when things break. But how can we take this forward?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I'm way off the toddler days with a 20-year-old now.
Oh wow!
But I think when you're relaying that in relation to a child. It takes me back to the time pressure. Yeah. And what are the things that stop you from behaving like that don't, you think you're saving time, but ultimately you're probably spending more time with a stressed out
in the long term. You always.
But yes,
and it's the same at work.
Patience and all those things come into play, right?
But they have to, and it does. You benefit long term, and it's kind of like you talked about with remote working earlier. You mentioned about that. It's the same kind of thing now, especially with remote. You can no longer have just a quick 2-minute chat with someone. Everything has to be a Teams meeting that's booked in for 30 odd minutes. So we're so time poor. And then there's so many people in these Teams meetings that they're just really ineffective. So we're so ridiculously inefficient in how we're working, and therefore time poor. And therefore we find it harder to do this stuff. And there needs to be a real shake-up in our ways of working, I think.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. And us as we all have and titles that denote the fact that we are, we are we have our professional titles that denote what role we play, but we're also human beings that have passions and interests outside of work. My title is Dachshund Fanatic.
Nice.
I have a miniature Dachshund called Heidi that rules my world. And I'm fascinated to know, Trenton, what your title would be.
My title would be, so if I became an Andy, I think I would be family backpacker.
Family backpacker.
Yes. So last year we took the kids out of school for about 6.5 months, and we went backpacking around a few countries in Africa and Asia.
How incredible!
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Is there another book coming out? Family backpacking.
Well, there's actually, believe it or not, there's a reasonable number of families who go off backpacking and homeschool your kids as you go along. And there are some family backpackers who now do this full time, and they write a blog about everywhere they go, and they have, they get enough site traffic that the adverts that they have on there generate them enough income to keep going.
I love it. We've touched on breaking bananas, world peace, family backpacking, and of course the topic of digital transformation. Yes. Trenton, it's been a real pleasure to have you with us. That's everything for this edition of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly of Digital Transformation. Thanks again to our guest, Trenton. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do remember to follow or subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode to enjoy. And Digital is on a mission to help close the world's digital skills gap. One of the ways we're doing this is by helping organisations deliver digital transformation more successfully through upskilling and reskilling.